From a very young age, I was aware that I was never the favorite child. It wasn't subtle. My parents openly favored my sister, and the impact of that favoritism shaped the course of my entire life. My sister, the so-called golden child, was treated like royalty, while I was left to struggle for recognition, validation, and affection. Growing up, it was clear that everything in our family revolved around her. Her needs and desires came first, and mine were ignored, even when I was the one who was supposed to be the center of attention. Birthdays were a prime example of how my sister was favored. Every year, without fail, my sister's favorite cake flavor was chosen, and my parents pretended not to notice that I hated it. My birthday always felt like an afterthought, and no matter how much I tried to speak up about my preferences, they were ignored. If I complained, I was told that I was being difficult and that my sister deserved to have things her way. If my sister accused me of something, no matter how unfounded, my parents would believe her without question and punish me, even if I had undeniable proof that she was lying. But if I tried to defend myself or accuse her of anything, my parents would always find a way to scold me. Felt like I could never win. The favoritism wasn't just about birthdays, it was pervasive in every aspect of my life. My sister would get the more expensive gifts, the clothes she wanted, and the trips she dreamed of. Meanwhile, I was left with whatever was left over, and even when I did receive something nice, it was always undercut with remarks about how lucky I was to get anything at all. My sister's wants and needs were prioritized, while my own desires and aspirations were overlooked. It was as if I was invisible in my own home, and my parents were so blinded by their adoration of her that they failed to see the harm they were causing me. As we got older, the emotional toll became more apparent. My sister, who had been somewhat indifferent to me during our childhood, began to take a much more active role in making my life miserable. When we entered our teenage years, her behavior started to deteriorate. Her lack of friends, her growing sense of entitlement, and her bitterness towards me turned her from an occasional bully into a full-fledged tormentor. I watched as she became increasingly isolated, and I don't know if it was because her friends ditched her due to her attitude or because she became so focused on trying to bring me down that she alienated everyone around her. Despite her alienation from peers, my parents continued to praise her achievements while constantly highlighting my flaws. I couldn't understand how they could be so blind to the fact that she was the one who needed guidance, yet they showered her with affection and compliments while berating me at every turn. My sister's lack of friends became the talk of our household, but instead of helping her address her social issues, my parents made excuses for her behavior and blamed me for everything. It didn't matter that I was popular at school or that I had friends, I was constantly compared to my sister and found wanting. If I excelled in anything, my accomplishments were either downplayed or completely ignored, while my sister's smallest achievements were met with fanfare and praise. The real trouble began when my sister turned her attention to my friendships. As she became more and more jealous of the relationships I had built, she started accusing me of things I didn't do. She would tell our parents that I was hanging out with the wrong crowd, and that my friends weren't good for me. My parents, already predisposed to believe her, took her side without question. I was forbidden from spending time with my friends, and I was told that I should be more like my sister and enjoy family time. This isolation became unbearable, and it was only through the support of my extended family that I managed to hold on to a sense of self-worth. My cousins, who lived in the same town, were the only people who didn't judge me. They understood what was going on, and they offered me the support and friendship I needed. However, this small comfort didn't last long. When I was young, I blurted out the truth about my sister's lack of friends, and that simple statement caused a ripple effect in our family. The adults in our extended family learned about it, and the fallout was immediate. My parents were furious, and I was punished for lying about my sister's social life. I was grounded for a month, but strangely, this punishment led to a shift. My parents, perhaps seeing the anger and frustration building in me, gave me some leeway afterward. The freedom to speak my mind, however limited, felt like a small victory in an otherwise oppressive household. But even that small victory was short-lived. When my sister changed schools, the situation worsened. Her social struggles, once hidden, became more visible. She demanded to switch schools, and my parents, eager to appease her, complied. The financial cost of her new school didn't matter. They were more concerned with her happiness and comfort. I never understood why they couldn't see the damage they were doing to me. While my sister was free to make choices and dictate the terms of her life, I was constantly stifled and controlled, trapped in a cycle of rejection and neglect. By the time I reached my teenage years, I had become accustomed to being dismissed. My sister was the golden child, and I was just an afterthought. She was the one who received all the praise, all the attention, and all the privileges, while I was left to pick up the pieces of my own self-esteem. Yet, as much as I resented the way things were, I continued to internalize the message that I was somehow less deserving than her. It took me many years to realize just how deeply this favoritism had shaped my sense of self-worth, and how much it had impacted my relationship with my family. As the years passed, the effects of growing up under my sister's shadow only intensified. My parents' favoritism towards her deepened, and I began to realize that nothing I did would ever be good enough to earn their praise or attention. It wasn't just the trivial things that hurt anymore, it was the deep emotional scars I was left with as I watched my sister thrive under the weight of our parents' admiration, while I was constantly compared to her and found wanting. My sister had no problem making herself the center of attention, especially when it came to anything that would take away from my moment. It wasn't just my birthdays or special occasions. She found ways to overshadow me at every turn. If there was a family gathering, she would somehow end up getting more praise for things that didn't matter, whether it was the way she dressed, her social life, or even her ability to manipulate situations. I didn't know how to compete with her, nor did I want to. All I wanted was the simple thing that every child desires, to feel seen and loved by my parents. But that was a luxury I never seemed to get. In high school, I started noticing the differences more acutely. While my sister's social life was chaotic, my own seemed relatively normal. I had friends, good grades, and a strong sense of who I was. But even then, my parents couldn't give me a break. If my sister had a problem, whether it was a bad grade or a fight with a friend, it became a family crisis. But when I had a similar issue, I was expected to simply handle it on my own without any acknowledgement or support. She had the right to make mistakes, but I was held to an impossible standard of perfection. I began to withdraw more and more, retreating into myself. The constant comparisons wore me down. I tried to be patient, to be understanding, but the favoritism was suffocating. It became clearer that my parents only saw my sister as the good child, the one who could do no wrong, and I was relegated to the role of the scapegoat. Even when I tried to have my own interests and hobbies, they were never taken seriously. When I pursued anything that didn't align with my sister's choices, my parents either ignored it or dismissed it as unimportant. It wasn't just my family that noticed the imbalance. As I reached my late teens, I began to see the way others treated me too. I realized that people could sense the way my parents treated me, and it made me feel inferior. When my sister and I were in the same room, she would dominate the conversation. She would act as if she was the one who mattered and I was just a passive observer. Even though I was older and had grown into my own identity, I was still treated like the younger, less important sibling. At times, my sister would use this power over me to manipulate situations, and I couldn't even fight back. If I ever stood up for myself, my parents would tell me to stop being so dramatic, or stop making things about me. I was constantly gaslighted into thinking that my feelings were invalid, that I was the one causing problems. Meanwhile, my sister, who was far from perfect, was always given a pass. As I entered adulthood, I started to build a life for myself. I left home for college and hoped that distance would help me get away from the constant comparisons. But even then, I couldn't escape the grip my sister and parents had on me. My sister didn't make it easy either. Whenever I achieved something, whether it was good grades, an internship, or just making new friends, my sister would find a way to belittle it. I could hear her whispers, how everything I did was not as good as what she was doing, how I was just lucky to be in the places I was. She always found a way to make me feel like I wasn't worthy of my accomplishments. One particular incident that sticks in my mind happened during one of our family visits. I had just gotten a new internship at a prestigious company. I was excited to share the news with my family, but when I did, my sister immediately interrupted with news of her latest accomplishment, which, of course, was much more impressive than mine. My parents, as always, turned their attention to her, showering her with praise while I was left standing there, feeling invisible. In that moment, I realized that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for my family. My sister would always be the center of their universe, and I would always be the one in the background. This realization hurt more than I could express. But what hurt even more was that my parents didn't even seem to notice. They didn't care about my pain or my frustration. They saw only their golden child, and everything they did, every decision they made, was centered around her. They refused to acknowledge the damage they were doing to me, and it became painfully clear that they would never change. I kept my distance from my family after that. I didn't want to be a part of a system that was designed to break me down. I focused on building a life that I could be proud of. But even then, the scars of growing up in a family that prioritized one child over another ran deep. The emotional damage was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. But despite the pain, something within me began to shift. I had spent so many years being treated like the second choice, the afterthought, but now I was determined to change the narrative. I realized that I had the power to control my own happiness, and I wasn't going to let my sister's dominance or my parents' favoritism dictate who I was anymore. Little did I know that my chance to take back control and get the justice I deserved would come sooner than I expected. And it would come in the most unexpected way, on the day of my wedding. The day of my wedding should have been the happiest day of my life. After years of struggle, emotional turmoil, and feeling less than worthy, I finally had the opportunity to step into a chapter of my life where I could feel valued and loved. My husband, the man who had supported me through all the emotional baggage and had seen me for who I truly was by my side. The wedding was meant to be a celebration of our love and a fresh start. But, as fate would have it, my sister and parents weren't done with me yet. I had made it clear to my parents that I wanted my wedding day to be about me and my future, not about my sister. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and I didn't want my sister to overshadow me yet again. But despite my wishes, it became apparent that they had no intention of respecting my boundaries. Even in the planning stages, I could feel the tension rising. My sister was always hovering, inserting herself into every decision. She would suggest things that she knew would make me uncomfortable, and my parents, of course, sided with her. The more I pushed back, the more they dismissed me. Their attitude was always the same: "It's just a wedding, why are you making it such a big deal?" But for me it was a big deal. This day was the culmination of everything I had fought for, and I refused to let my sister take it away from me. I wasn't going to let her ruin my wedding like she had ruined so many other moments in my life. Yet, as the wedding day approached, I started to feel that familiar sense of dread, the feeling of being outnumbered and outshone. The night before the wedding, I had a deep conversation with my husband. We had discussed all the possible scenarios, how to handle my parents, how to keep my sister at bay, and how to focus on what mattered. My husband was fully on my side. He understood how important this day was to me, and he was determined to make it special, despite the emotional baggage we were carrying. But it wasn't until the wedding ceremony that I saw just how far my parents and sister were willing to go. The moment I entered the venue, I was greeted with the faces of all the people who had supported me, my extended family, friends, and even some colleagues who had seen me through the tough years. I felt like I could finally breathe, as if all the years of unfairness and struggle were behind me. But as soon as I made my way to the front of the room, I noticed something wasn't quite right. The whispers began immediately. My father, who had been standing by my side, seemed to stiffen as he saw something happening at the entrance. My heart sank when I realized what it was. My sister, dressed in a wedding gown, was trying to walk down the aisle. The audacity of it took my breath away. This was supposed to be my day, and yet here she was, attempting to steal the spotlight yet again. At that moment, I had to fight every urge in my body to scream or confront her. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, in the most humiliating way possible, my sister was trying to undermine me. She was trying to make it all about her. My father stood frozen, unsure of what to do. It was as though he was torn between the loyalty to his daughter and the pressure from my sister to let her have her moment. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The wedding ceremony, which was supposed to be the most beautiful and sacred moment of my life, was now turning into a circus. My husband, sensing the impending chaos, immediately intervened. He took charge and sent my sister back out, instructing the security personnel to remove her. I was stunned. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was actually standing up for me. But the battle wasn't over. As much as I wanted to move on from the confrontation, I could see the damage being done. My parents were furious and the tension was palpable. The entire ceremony was tainted by their actions. The guests, many of whom were unfamiliar with the history of my family, could sense the tension, and some even looked on with sympathy. My sister, after being escorted out, was clearly upset, but she didn't leave the venue. Instead, she tried to barge back in multiple times, each time claiming she had a right to be there. The worst part wasn't the disruption itself, but the fact that my parents didn't care about how I felt. They were too focused on placating my sister, even when she had crossed a line. They tried to justify her actions, claiming she was simply upset about being left out of the ceremony. But to me it was clear that she didn't want to participate. She wanted to ruin everything I had worked for. My entire life had been spent watching her get away with things, and now she was doing it on the most important day of my life. Despite all the chaos, I managed to pull myself together. With the support of my husband, we proceeded with the ceremony. The rest of the day was a blur of emotions, anger, betrayal, and finally, a sense of triumph. I had finally stood up for myself in the face of years of emotional abuse. It wasn't the wedding I had envisioned, but in some ways it was even better. It was my victory over everything my family had done to me. By the time the reception rolled around, I was exhausted, but I felt a deep sense of relief. I had made it through the day, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't a victim. I was in control. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore, and I didn't need my sister to validate me. This was my moment, and I was going to savor every second of it. As the night wore on, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. My parents and sister were left humiliated, and the entire family had witnessed the dysfunction they had created over the years. For once, I didn't feel guilty for what had happened. The events that unfolded were the direct result of their actions. I had waited years for this moment, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. The sweet revenge I had longed for had finally arrived, not in the way I expected, but in a way that was ultimately far more satisfying than I could have imagined. As the wedding day came to a close, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was a sense of victory, sure, but there was also a strange emptiness. My wedding, my special day, had been tainted by my family's actions, and while it was satisfying to know they had been caught in their own web of manipulation, it didn't quite feel like the celebration I had hoped for. I had always dreamed of a harmonious, loving family supporting me on the most important day of my life, but instead, I had been forced to confront the ugly reality of their favoritism and disregard for my happiness. That night, I went home with my new husband, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He could see that I was struggling with the emotions of the day, but he was there for me as always. He reassured me that the day had still been about us, about the love we shared and the new life we were starting together. But despite his comforting words, a small part of me couldn't help but feel a lingering sadness about what my family had done. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind. We were still riding the high of the celebration, but the consequences of the day began to unfold. My parents, who had spent so long trying to control every aspect of my life, were now attempting to shift the blame for their actions. They called me repeatedly, demanding that I speak with them, insisting that they hadn't meant to hurt me. They tried to justify their behavior by claiming they were simply trying to help with the wedding and that they didn't mean to make it all about my sister. But I knew better. They didn't care about me. If they had, they would have respected my wishes. If they had truly wanted to help, they would have supported me, not tried to manipulate the situation to fit their narrative. They hadn't cared about my feelings when they decided to make my sister the center of attention all my life, so why should I care about theirs now? I was tired of pretending everything was fine when it was clear to me that my parents would never change. I didn't respond to their calls and I didn't meet with them. I had made my decision. My family had shown me time and time again that I wasn't worth their full attention. Now, on my wedding day, they had crossed a line that I could never ignore. I couldn't allow them back into my life, not without a major shift in their attitude. Meanwhile, my sister had gone even further off the deep end. She was furious about being exposed for what she had done, but instead of taking responsibility, she doubled down on her lies. She sent me angry messages, blaming me for ruining everything and calling me every name in the book. She even went as far as to accuse my husband of manipulating me, of convincing me to turn against her. Her jealousy and entitlement were suffocating, and I knew I couldn't have her in my life anymore. Despite all of this, there was a part of me that still felt the sting of rejection. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their love and approval, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. I had learned to accept the hurt, but that didn't mean it didn't still affect me. The realization that my family would never change, that they would always put my sister first, was a tough pill to swallow. But as difficult as it was, I knew I had to move forward. I couldn't let their toxicity continue to poison my life. I took solace in the fact that I had finally broken free from their grip. With my husband by my side, I was no longer the helpless, isolated child that I once was. I was an adult with a partner who respected me, loved me, and supported me in a way my parents never had. Together, we had built something beautiful, something that no one could tear apart. Over the next few weeks, my husband and I decided to take a break from my family altogether. We spent time together, enjoying our new life as a married couple. We went on a small trip, just the two of us, to recharge and put the chaos of the wedding behind us. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells around my parents or worried about my sister's next move. I was free. Eventually, I had to face the reality that I couldn't keep running from my family forever. My parents continued to try and reach out, but I remained firm in my decision. I told them I needed space and that they would have to prove that they truly cared about me, not just their image. I wasn't going to be their emotional punching bag anymore, and if they wanted a relationship with me, they would have to earn it. The decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. In the end, my family never really came around. They tried to convince me to reconcile, but I knew that as long as they continued to treat me as less than, there was no way forward. My sister remained stuck in her cycle of jealousy and manipulation, and my parents never fully understood why I couldn't forgive them. But despite all of this, I was at peace. I had come to terms with the fact that I might never have the family I had always wanted. I had stopped trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me. And, most importantly, I had learned to prioritize my own happiness over their expectations. Now, when I look back on that day, on my wedding day, I realized that it wasn't just a day of triumph over my family's mistreatment. It was a day of personal growth and liberation. It was the day I truly let go of the idea that I needed my family's approval to be happy. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had everything I needed: love, freedom, and the confidence to live my life on my own terms. After the wedding chaos, the months that followed felt like a roller coaster of emotions. On the one hand, I had finally gained a sense of control over my life that I had never known before. For the first time, I wasn't constantly running on the treadmill of my family's expectations. I had chosen my own path, made my own decisions, and most importantly, I had learned to live for myself. But there were still moments when the weight of my past crept in, when I'd find myself feeling lonely or wondering if I was doing the right thing by keeping my distance from my family. The hurt was still fresh, and the memories of years spent in my sister's shadow haunted me. But I reminded myself that this was not my fault. I didn't ask for this life. I didn't choose to be born into a family that would constantly make me feel less than. I had tried to be the good daughter, the perfect sibling, but in the end, it didn't matter. No matter how hard I tried, nothing was ever enough for them. The unfairness of it all still stung, but I had started to heal. And I had to admit I was doing better without them. One of the most significant changes in my life came after I fully embraced the idea of living for myself. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a gradual process, a shift in mindset that took time to settle in. I started to realize that I had the power to decide what my life would look like, and it was up to me to make sure it was fulfilling and happy. The control that my parents and sister had over me for so long was no longer a factor in my day-to-day decisions. I was free. My husband, who had been my constant support through everything, played a significant role in this transformation. He had always seen me for who I truly was, someone deserving of love, respect, and happiness. He encouraged me to pursue my dreams and passions, reminding me that I didn't have to be trapped by the labels and roles my family had imposed on me. His belief in me gave me the courage to step out of my comfort zone and start living life on my own terms. One of the first things I did for myself was go back to school. I had always wanted to further my education, but my family's control over my life had kept me from pursuing my own goals. They had always belittled my achievements and downplayed my capabilities, and that made me question my own worth. But now, with the weight of their expectations lifted, I realized I could do whatever I set my mind to. I applied for a program I had always dreamed of attending, and this time, I didn't let anyone's opinion stop me. When I got accepted into the program, it felt like a massive victory. It was more than just the academic accomplishment, it was a personal triumph. I had made a choice that was completely independent of my family's influence. I was choosing to invest in myself, and that was empowering. But even though I was living for myself, there were still moments when I found myself wondering if I was doing the right thing by keeping my distance from my family. Would they ever change? Could they ever truly understand how much they had hurt me? I had doubts, but I also had to acknowledge the reality. The damage had been done. They had shown me who they were time and time again, and I had finally reached a point where I had to prioritize my own well-being over trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. Over time, I found that my emotional health improved. I was no longer carrying the weight of guilt, shame, or resentment that had haunted me for so many years. I didn't have to worry about being compared to my sister or living up to their impossible expectations. I was free to make mistakes, pursue my passions, and grow without feeling like I was constantly being judged or held back. The absence of my family in my life was painful, but it also made space for new relationships to flourish. I began to cultivate deep, meaningful friendships with people who valued me for who I was. I realized that I didn't need my family's approval to feel loved or to feel like I belonged. These new friendships were built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding, things that I had never experienced with my family. One of the biggest surprises in my journey was how my relationship with my husband continued to grow stronger. After all the struggles with my family, we were closer than ever. His unwavering support and loyalty made me realize how fortunate I was to have him by my side. He didn't judge me or belittle me. Instead, he lifted me up, helping me recognize my own worth. He was my partner in every sense of the word, and together we built a life based on love and mutual respect, not manipulation and control. But even as I found peace in my new life, there were still moments of conflict. My family didn't let go so easily. They continued to reach out, trying to pull me back into their drama, trying to manipulate me into feeling guilty for setting boundaries. But I stood firm. I refused to let them dictate my life anymore. They had made their choices and I had made mine. As time passed, the emotional distance between my family and me grew wider. There were no more birthday calls, no more invitations to family events. But I found that I didn't miss it. I had filled my life with people who truly cared about me, who supported me without trying to control me. And slowly, I began to understand that this was the life I was meant to live, not one dictated by my family's toxic dynamics. I had built a life that was truly mine. And in that, I found peace. I wasn't defined by my family's actions or expectations anymore. I had created a new future for myself, one that was full of possibility, love, and freedom. It wasn't perfect and there were still challenges to face, but for the first time in my life, I was truly happy. As the years passed, I came to realize that my journey toward freedom and self-empowerment wasn't just about cutting ties with my family, but about reclaiming my own identity. What I had been through, the discrimination, the manipulation, the constant comparisons, was all a part of a larger story of resilience and growth. Looking back, I saw how far I had come. From being the overlooked and undervalued daughter to finally standing strong in my own space, making choices for myself, I felt an immense sense of pride. But what mattered most now was that I was moving forward, not just surviving but thriving. The lessons I had learned were not just about standing up to my family or demanding respect. They were about embracing my own worth and recognizing that I was deserving of happiness, love, and success. For so long, I had let my parents and sister dictate my sense of self, but now I understood that I had the power to create my own narrative. I didn't need their validation or approval to live the life I wanted. It was liberating to finally recognize that I didn't have to apologize for who I was. One of the biggest transformations that came from all of this was my ability to set healthy boundaries. For so long, I had allowed my family to dictate my actions and decisions. But as I grew stronger, I learned how to say no. I learned that it was okay to put myself first, to protect my mental and emotional well-being. This was one of the most powerful tools I had in my arsenal, and it helped me navigate the complicated dynamics with my family moving forward. Although my family had tried to reach out, and despite their attempts to make amends, I remained firm in my decision to keep them at a distance. It wasn't out of malice or resentment but out of self-preservation. I realized that no matter how much they claimed to change, the fundamental issue remained. They had never truly understood or respected me for who I was. Instead, they had constantly tried to mold me into what they wanted me to be. And after all these years, I had finally reached the point where I was no longer willing to settle for that. For a long time, I thought I needed my family's love and approval to be complete. I believed that without them, I would always be missing something, a piece of myself. But I came to understand that the love I needed most was the love I gave to myself. I had spent so many years seeking validation from people who never truly saw me for who I was. But once I stopped chasing their approval and started validating myself, everything shifted. I no longer defined myself by their treatment of me. With this newfound clarity, I began to focus more on the future, on the life my husband and I were building together. We had started to talk about growing our family, discussing the possibility of having children. This was a conversation that was both exciting and intimidating, given the trauma I had experienced with my own family. But I was determined not to repeat the patterns of favoritism and manipulation that had been so pervasive in my upbringing. I knew I had the power to raise children who would know they were loved for who they were, not for any external standards set by others. As I moved forward, I also began to find peace with my past. I had spent so much time carrying around resentment and anger toward my parents and sister that it had become a part of who I was. But I realized that holding on to that anger only kept me chained to them. The best thing I could do for myself was to let go. Letting go didn't mean I had to forgive them or accept their behavior, but it did mean I was no longer allowing them to control my emotions or my future. I chose to release the grip that the past had on me and to embrace the present, free from the weight of old wounds. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. There were times when I would miss the idea of having a close-knit family, a unit that loved and supported each other unconditionally. But I quickly reminded myself that family isn't always about blood. The love and support I had found from my husband, my extended family, and my close friends were more than enough. I had built a network of people who cared about me, who saw me for who I truly was, and who supported me unconditionally. That was enough. I also began to realize how much I had grown in my relationship with my husband. From the very beginning, he had been my partner in every sense of the word, helping me to navigate the complexities of family dynamics and empowering me to stand up for myself. He was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone, that we were in this together. The bond we had created, built on mutual respect, love, and understanding, was stronger than any family drama or manipulation could ever break. Moving forward, I felt ready to take on whatever challenges came my way. The scars from my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. I was stronger than I had ever been, more confident, and more at peace with who I was. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone silence it again. And most importantly, I had learned that true happiness comes from within. It's about choosing yourself, loving yourself, and knowing that you are worthy of the life you want to create. As I looked ahead, I knew that the road would still have its bumps and turns, but I also knew that I was ready. With my husband by my side and the lessons I had learned from my past, I felt ready to face whatever the future had in store. The key message from this story is the importance of recognizing one's own worth and embracing personal growth, regardless of the circumstances or challenges we face. For much of her life, the narrator struggled under the weight of favoritism and manipulation from her family, which led to years of feeling undervalued and neglected. However, through perseverance and a deep understanding of her own strength, she learned to break free from the toxic patterns that had defined her relationships. The story teaches us that true freedom comes from within, from learning to set boundaries, trusting ourselves, and letting go of the need for external validation. It's never too late to reclaim your personal power and prioritize your own well-being. No matter what stage of life we are in, it's essential to take the time to reflect on our own needs and aspirations, to recognize when we are being mistreated, and to have the courage to step away from relationships that don't serve us. This story is a reminder that the love and respect we seek should come from within, and that by honoring ourselves, we create space for healthier, more meaningful connections. It's a lesson in resilience, self-empowerment, and the value of making decisions that lead to personal happiness, a message that can resonate with anyone, especially those in later stages of life, as they reflect on the wisdom and strength gained through experience. Thank you so much for watching. If you found value in today's video, be sure to leave a comment with 1 below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to know how this story resonated with you. What are your thoughts or feelings after hearing it? Share them in the comments. We're all in this together. See you in the next video.